The snow came sideways, sharp as thrown sand, rattling against the windshield until it sounded like the car itself was protesting. Ethan Hale tightened his grip on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, eyes stinging from the strain of keeping them open. The wipers dragged back and forth in a tired rhythm, smearing white into gray, gray into nothing. The road ahead was no longer a road so much as a suggestion, a pale ribbon swallowed by woods and weather. The engine coughed. Ethan felt it through the floor before he heard it. A shudder, a hollow knock, the warning rattle he'd been pretending not to notice for the last 10 miles. He eased his foot off the gas, whispered something that might have been a prayer or might have just been stubbornness. The engine answered by dying completely. Silence rushed in, sudden and heavy, as if the storm had been waiting for permission to take over. Wind shoved at the car. Snow hissed against the doors. The dashboard lights flickered once, then went dark. Ethan sat still, breathing hard, hands still locked on the wheel. He counted to 5 without knowing why. Then 10. The car did not come back to life. In the back seat, Noah slept. Ethan twisted in his seat and looked at his son through the dim light, filtering in through the snow-choked windows. Noah's head was tipped to one side, mouth slightly open, breath fogging faintly in the cold air. He was bundled in layers that didn't quite match, too thin jacket over a hoodie, gloves with frayed fingertips. Everything Ethan had managed to keep. Ethan watched Noah's chest rise, fall, rise again. That rhythm was the only thing keeping him steady. They had not been heading anywhere in particular. That was the truth Ethan hadn't wanted to say out loud, not even to himself. He'd pointed the car north because south felt impossible and east held too many memories, and west cost money they didn't have. North had roads that got quieter the farther you went. Fewer questions, fewer mirrors. He hadn't been running toward a new beginning. He was running away from the wreckage of an old one. Unpaid bills stacked like accusations, a house emptied by court order and silence, a marriage that hadn't exploded so much as dissolved, leaving him with the slow realization that everything solid could still disappear. The storm howled harder, rocking the car. Ethan pulled his coat tighter and tried the ignition again. The engine turned over once, weakly, then stopped. The sound echoed too loudly in the stillness that followed. "We're okay," he murmured, though no one could hear him. "We're okay." He opened the door, and the cold punched him in the face. Snow rushed in immediately, biting, urgent. His boots sank deep when he stepped out, the sound sharp and brittle, like stepping on broken glass. The air smelled metallic, clean, and unforgiving. The road behind them had already begun to disappear, erased by white. The road ahead was worse. Ethan scanned the tree line, heart pounding. Dark pines crowded close, their branches heavy with snow, bending inward like they were conferring about him. For a moment, there was nothing but storm and forest and the awful clarity of how small he was inside it. Then he saw it. Through the shifting veil of snow, up on a low hill beyond the trees, something darker rose against the white. Straight lines, angles that did not belong to nature. Stone. Ethan squinted, lifted a gloved hand to block the snow from his eyes. As the wind shifted, the shape sharpened. A house. Not a cabin. Not a shed. A house. Large, squared, built of gray stone that looked almost blue in the cold light. It sat back from the road, half hidden by trees, its silhouette severe and symmetrical. Tall windows stared out blankly, dark and unlit. The roof sagged slightly under the weight of snow, but it held. For a strange moment, Ethan felt like the house was watching him. The sight tugged at something in his memory, faint but insistent. He knew this place. Years ago, before Noah, before everything went wrong, he'd worked construction jobs wherever he could find them. One winter contract had brought him through this region. He remembered riding in the passenger seat of a truck, passing a hill like this one, and someone had nodded toward a stone house buried in trees and said, "That's the cold house." No explanation, just the name. Said like a fact. Ethan hadn't thought about it again. Until now. The wind surged, stealing his breath, snapping him back into the present. He looked at the car, already losing its outline beneath snow, then back at the house. Trespassing. Unsafe. Probably collapsing from the inside out. But it was standing, and standing was more than the car could manage. Ethan opened the back door and gently shook Noah's shoulder. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Wake up." Noah stirred, blinking, confusion creasing his face. "Dad." "We're gonna take a little walk," Ethan said. "Just for a bit." "Did we get there?" Ethan swallowed. Not exactly. He wrapped Noah in an extra blanket, lifted him down, and closed the car door behind them. The sound felt final, though he didn't know why. Together they trudged toward the hill, each step an effort, snow pulling at their legs like hands trying to keep them. Up close, the house was even bigger. The stonework was old but solid, the kind laid by hands that expected it to last. The porch sagged in the middle, but it didn't give. The front door was heavy wood, its surface scarred by age and weather. Ethan hesitated, Noah pressed against his side. "Is someone here?" Noah asked. "I don't think so," Ethan said, though he couldn't be sure. The silence was deep, undisturbed. No tracks, no light, just the sound of the storm. He reached for the handle. It resisted at first, stiff with cold, then turned slowly, reluctantly. The door opened with a long, aching sigh, like something exhaling after holding its breath for years. Cold air rushed out to meet them, thicker than the storm outside, stale and unmoving. Inside, darkness. Ethan flicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through dust and settled on a wide entry hall. A table stood against the wall, one leg propped on a book to keep it level. A coat rack leaned, empty hooks reaching upward. Farther in, a chair lay tipped on its side, as if someone had just stood up and never returned. Everything looked paused. Not broken, not destroyed, just stopped. "Dad," Noah whispered. "It's quiet." "I know," Ethan said. Every instinct warned him to leave, to close the door and face the storm instead of whatever waited inside. But the cold was already gnawing at his bones, and Noah's fingers were numb in his gloves. Rules were a luxury for warmer days. They moved carefully, footsteps echoing too loudly on the wooden floor. Ethan checked corners, doorways, listening for sounds that didn't belong to the house itself. There was nothing. No movement. No voices. Only the faint groan of old beams adjusting to the cold. They found a small bedroom upstairs, tucked away from the worst of the drafts. The window was boarded, but the room felt less exposed, less hollow. Ethan spread their coats on the floor, wrapped Noah in blankets, and sat beside him, back against the wall. The storm battered the house, but the walls held. Somewhere deep within the structure, wood creaked and settled, not in protest, but in acknowledgement, like the house knew it was being used again. Ethan closed his eyes, just for a moment, and let the warmth of stillness sink in. For tonight, they were not running. For tonight, this was enough. Morning arrived quietly, as if unsure it was welcome. Ethan woke to a thin, gray light seeping through the edges of the boarded window. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His body was stiff, his breath visible in the air, the floor hard beneath him. Then the memories rushed back. The storm, the dead car, the hill, the door that had opened like it was exhaling. The house. He sat up slowly, listening. The storm had moved on. In its place was a deep, layered silence, broken only by the faint creak of wood settling and the distant sigh of wind through trees. The kind of quiet that didn't press on your ears, but waited. Noah was still asleep, curled tight in the blankets, hair sticking up at the crown. Ethan watched him for a few seconds longer than necessary, just to be sure. Then he stood, pulled on his boots, and stepped into the hallway. Dust coated everything in a fine, even layer, like the house had been holding its breath for years and never let it out. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, exposing older patterns beneath. Flowers fading into geometry, colors dimmed but stubborn. Doors stood half open, frozen mid-decision. A clock without hands stared down from the wall. Ethan moved carefully, not wanting to disturb whatever balance held the place together. Downstairs, light filtered in through narrow gaps where boards had warped away from windows. It painted pale stripes across the floor, illuminating furniture arranged with a kind of quiet intention. A dining table with one chair pulled out. A sofa draped in a blanket that had once been bright. Shelves still half full, books leaning into one another like they'd grown tired of standing alone. This wasn't abandonment by violence. It was abandonment by exhaustion. Ethan's stomach tightened. He knew that feeling too well. He followed a narrow door near the back of the kitchen, the hinges protesting softly as he opened it. Stairs descended into darkness, steep and narrow. The air changed immediately, cooler, damp, carrying the smell of old metal and stone. The basement. Ethan hesitated, then clicked on his flashlight, and started down. Each step creaked, but held. At the bottom, the beam swept across shelves of forgotten jars, a workbench layered in rusted tools, and then, there, the boiler. It stood against the far wall like a sleeping animal, bulky and silent, its surface scarred with rust but unbroken. Pipes ran from it like veins, disappearing into the ceiling. The gauge was dark, needle resting at 0. Ethan approached slowly, hand hovering just above the metal. He pressed his palm against it. Cold, but solid. A memory surfaced without warning. His father in a dim garage, sleeves rolled up, grease in the lines of his hands. Machines aren't stubborn, he used to say. People are. You rush them, they shut down. You listen, they'll tell you what they need. Ethan swallowed. His father had believed in fixing things long after others had given up on them. Long after it stopped being practical. He scanned the boiler, checking valves, lines, labels worn nearly smooth. Ancient, yes. Dead, maybe not. Outside, Ethan found the gas meter half buried in snow, the metal tag faded and unreadable. His breath fogged thickly as he brushed ice away with his glove. The line was capped, but intact. He hesitated, the weight of the choice pressing down hard. If this went wrong? No. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Slowly, carefully, he turned the valve just enough. A faint hiss answered. Not angry, not dangerous. Just there. Back in the basement, his heart pounded loud enough to feel like it might echo. He struck a match. The sound snapped sharp in the silence. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the pilot caught. A thin blue flame bloomed, unsteady but alive. The boiler shuddered, metal expanding with a low groan, like joints stretching after too long still. Ethan stepped back, breath held, waiting for something to break. Nothing did. Instead, a deep, steady hum began to rise. Ethan laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that startled even him. He ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, and pressed his hand against the nearest radiator. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, honestly, the metal warmed. Dad, Noah's voice drifted from the hallway. Ethan turned to see him standing there, eyes wide, barefoot on the cold floor. What's that sound? Ethan knelt, hands shaking now, and pulled Noah into a hug. That, he said, voice thick, is heat. Noah laughed, the sound bright and sudden, like it hadn't been used in a while. It's warm. They spent the rest of the day cleaning. Ethan swept. Noah wiped surfaces with a rag far too big for his hands. They opened curtains, pried boards loose enough to let light in. Dust rose and danced in sunbeams, disturbed after decades of stillness. The house seemed to react to every small effort, creaking, settling, adjusting, as if it noticed. In a back room, behind a wardrobe that had been shoved against the wall, Ethan found a stack of letters tied with fraying ribbon. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but careful. He opened one, then another. They spoke of winters endured, of laughter around a table, of hope written gently between lines of worry. One sentence caught his breath and held it. If someone ever finds this place again, I hope they stay. Ethan sat there for a long time, the letter resting in his hands. That night, as the house warmed fully and the shadows softened, he looked around at the walls, the floors, the ceiling that had not collapsed despite being forgotten. The house had not been waiting to be owned. It had been waiting to be needed. The days settled into one another the way snow does when it melts and freezes again, softened by light, hardened by night, reshaped without ever fully disappearing. Morning meant checking the boiler, listening for its steady breath. Afternoon meant clearing snow from the porch, pushing it back from the steps so the door could open without protest. Ethan learned the rhythm of the house quickly, where the floorboards sighed, which windows leaked cold, which corners collected dust like secrets. Noah learned it faster. He moved through the rooms as if he'd always known where the light would fall. They ate simply. Soup stretched thin. Bread toasted slowly on the stovetop. The house held the heat now, not generously, but faithfully. At night, the radiators whispered to one another through the walls, a low conversation that soothed Ethan into sleep. It felt dangerous, how close to peace he was getting. On the 5th morning, Ethan was shoveling the drive when he heard the sound of an engine that wasn't theirs. He froze, shovel half buried in slush. At the end of the drive, a white utility truck had pulled to a stop, its tires crunching softly against ice. The county seal was stamped on the door. The engine idled, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Ethan's pulse spiked. He straightened slowly, hands tightening around the handle of the shovel like it might defend him. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-50s, maybe older, bundled in a heavy jacket with reflective stripes dulled by use. His beard was gray and neatly trimmed, his movements unhurried. He looked up at the house, eyes narrowing slightly, then at the thin line of smoke curling from the chimney. He smiled. "Didn't expect to see that," the man said, nodding toward the smoke as he walked closer. Ethan didn't move. "See what? Life," the man replied easily. "Been a while." The word hung between them. Ethan waited for the accusation. The clipboard. The questions. "Who are you? Why are you here? Do you have permission?" None came. "You folks staying up there?" the man asked. "For now," Ethan said. He heard the defensiveness in his own voice and hated it. The man studied him, not unkindly. "House has been empty a long time," he said. "Longer than people remember. Most folks just forgot about it." Ethan said nothing. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small brass key, worn smooth from years of handling. He held it out. "Mailbox down by the road still works. Figure if someone's inside, they ought to get their mail." Ethan stared at the key, stunned. "You're not." The man shook his head. "Not my job to ask questions that don't need answers." He glanced up at the house again. "Truth is, it's been cold since people stopped believing it mattered." He tipped an imaginary hat and walked back to the truck. The engine started. The truck rolled away. Ethan stood there long after it disappeared, the key cold and heavy in his palm. That night, fear returned like an old ache. As Noah slept upstairs, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the letter he'd found earlier folded neatly beside his cup. The warmth felt fragile now, temporary. All it would take was one complaint, one official notice, and they'd be back on the road. Back to counting breaths in the dark. The house creaked around him, a low, uncertain sound. The temperature dropped hard after midnight. Ethan woke to the sound of something sharp and wrong. A crack like a gunshot, followed by a hiss that made his stomach drop. He was out of bed and running before his mind caught up. Water sprayed from a burst pipe in the hallway, arcing wildly, soaking the walls, pooling fast on the floor. Cold air rushed in through the damage, steam rising where warmth met disaster. "Noah!" Ethan shouted. His son appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "What happened?" "Grab towels," Ethan said, already twisting the nearest valve with numbing fingers. All of them. They worked together in frantic silence, towels pressed, water mopped, valves forced shut with aching hands. The house groaned, protesting the stress, but it didn't give up. Slowly, the leak weakened, then stopped. They sat on the floor afterward, wrapped in blankets, breathing hard. Their breath fogged faintly in the cooling air. Noah broke the silence first. "Dad," he said quietly, "I think the house is awake." Ethan looked around at the damp walls, the towels draped like bandages, the boiler still humming stubbornly in the basement. He realized Noah was right. And somehow, so was he. The rumor didn't spread the way rumors usually do. There were no announcements, no signs nailed to posts, no words shouted into the cold. It moved quietly, like warmth itself, hand to hand, breath to breath. Someone mentioned smoke from a chimney that hadn't smoked in years. Someone else mentioned lights at night on the hill. Someone said, almost embarrassed, "I heard it's warm up there." That was all it took. The first knock came just after dusk. Ethan was stirring a pot of soup on the stove when he heard it, soft, tentative, as if whoever stood on the porch wasn't sure they deserved to be heard. He froze, spoon midair. Noah looked up from the table, eyes wide but curious. Another knock, still gentle. Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to retreat, to protect what little they had carved out. He thought of the county truck, of clipboards and notices, of rules that always arrived late but enforced themselves fully. He opened the door anyway. A woman stood there, hunched against the cold, a baby wrapped tightly against her chest. Snow clung to her coat. Her eyes were red, not from the wind alone. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, before Ethan could speak. "I was told. Someone said there was heat here. Just for the night. I don't have anywhere else." Ethan hesitated. Responsibility loomed heavy and immediate. Once you let someone in, you didn't just give them warmth, you gave them space in your life. Space that could fill up fast. The baby shifted, let out a small sound. Ethan stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The relief on her face was immediate and devastating. She crossed the threshold like she was afraid the house might change its mind. The baby fell asleep almost instantly in the warmth, breath evening out. She stayed one night. The next evening, another came. A young man barely out of his teens, hands cracked and bleeding from the cold, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Ethan fed him, gave him a blanket, showed him where to sleep. Then another. An older man whose trailer roof had collapsed under snow. A woman who said she just needed a place to think. They arrived one by one, quietly, respectfully, as if the house demanded a certain tone. The rooms filled with low voices and cautious laughter. Shoes lined up near the door. Blankets were shared, then folded neatly in the morning. The kitchen became the heart of everything. Steam rising from pots, mugs warming hands. The steady hum of conversation that never grew too loud. Ethan moved through it all with a strange mix of pride and fear. At night, when everyone slept, he sat alone and counted risks. Counted the days until someone official might arrive and shut it all down. Counted how quickly things could fall apart. Hope, he was learning, was heavy. One afternoon, while searching for extra utensils, Ethan pulled open a drawer in the dining room that had been stuck shut since they arrived. It gave way suddenly, spilling papers onto the floor. Among them was a folded document, brittle at the edges. A deed copy, incomplete, old. The names blurred with age, the legal language dense and unresolved. Ownership that led nowhere. A house that technically belonged to no one and everyone at once. Ethan sat back on his heels, document trembling in his hands. This could end everything, or it could mean nothing at all. That evening, Noah disappeared for a long time. When Ethan finally found him, the boy was crouched on the porch with a can of paint they'd found in the cellar. His tongue stuck out in concentration as he brushed careful letters onto a scrap of wood. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. Noah grinned, proud and unafraid. Making a sign. He held it up when he finished. The letters were uneven, the paint a little drippy. Warmth is not trespassing. Ethan felt something inside him shift, settle. He nailed the sign beside the door before he could change his mind. That night, the house breathed easy, and so did he. The letter arrived on a gray morning when winter finally began to loosen its grip. It sat alone in the mailbox at the edge of the drive, its envelope thin and unassuming, addressed in careful handwriting to no name at all. Just 4 words, centered and deliberate. To whoever stayed. Ethan stood in the cold for a long moment, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. He had grown used to envelopes that demanded things. Money, explanations, apologies. This one asked for nothing. Inside, the paper was creased once, neatly, as if it had been folded with intention. "I heard that the house is warm again." The words were simple, unadorned. "My family built it long ago. We loved it, but we were afraid of what it asked of us, and one winter we left. No one ever truly owned it after that. It seems fitting that the people who needed it most found it again. Thank you for staying." There was no signature, no return address, no claim. Ethan read it twice, then a third time, each word settling deeper than the last. When he finally folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket, the house creaked softly around him, as if acknowledging the moment. That spring, the hill grew busy. It started small. Someone left a box of nails on the porch. Someone else repaired a broken window without asking. A man who'd stayed for a week came back with a ladder and fixed a leak in the roof. A woman returned with her teenage sons and patched the fence out back. No one talked about ownership. They talked about need. Ethan watched it happen from the edges at first, unsure of where he fit now that the house no longer felt borrowed. He found himself answering questions, pointing out weak spots in the roof, showing people where the pipes ran. He was no longer apologizing for being there. He was explaining. The house responded to the attention eagerly. Windows cleared. Drafts softened. The boiler ran smoother, its old metal body humming with pride. Sunlight reached corners that had been dark for decades. Ethan felt it happening inside himself too. He was no longer bracing for loss at every quiet moment. He slept deeper. He laughed without checking himself. He spoke about the future without lowering his voice. The 1-year mark arrived without ceremony. Someone noticed it only because the snowdrops bloomed early near the porch, pushing through the soil where Noah had planted them months before. Someone else remembered the date because it was the same night the boiler first held through a hard freeze. They decided to mark it with dinner. Tables were dragged together in the dining room, boards set end to end until there was barely space to walk around them. People brought what they could: bread, soup, potatoes, jars of preserved fruit. The room filled with warmth and noise, shoulders brushing, voices overlapping. Ethan stood at the head of the table, looking at the faces turned toward him. People who had once arrived hollow now looked grounded, steady. He felt something tighten in his chest. "I didn't plan this," he said, voice rough. "I didn't know what this would become." A murmur of understanding moved through the room. "I just needed somewhere to stop," he continued. "And the house let me." Someone lifted a glass. Someone else nodded. Noah stood on a chair beside him, eyes bright. "The house has a name now," he announced. The room stilled. "The warm house," Noah said simply. No one argued. They raised their glasses, mugs, bowls, whatever they had. The names settled into the walls, into the beams, into the long memory of the place. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the last guest had settled into sleep, Ethan stood alone in the hallway. The house was quiet but alive, breathing around him. He thought of all the ways he had failed: jobs lost, promises broken, nights he'd chosen fear over effort. He had carried that weight like proof of who he was. Standing there now, he let it go. Not because he had earned forgiveness, but because he had learned how to stay. The house had claimed its name, and in doing so, it had given him one too. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came the way healing does, unevenly, quietly, without asking permission. The snow pulled back inch by inch, revealing dark soil beneath, damp and patient. Ice loosened its grip on the eaves, dripping in slow confession. The air softened, carrying the smell of thawed pine and earth remembering itself. Ethan noticed the first green shoots one morning near the porch steps, pushing through ground that had only known cold for years. He knelt, touched the leaves gently, as if afraid they might vanish if acknowledged too loudly. "They made it," Noah said, standing beside him. Ethan nodded. "So did we." The garden grew steadily after that. Rows of vegetables where fear once sat frozen. Flowers where footprints had once disappeared overnight. People took turns tending it, passing tools hand to hand, leaving notes about what needed water and what needed time. The house became something people relied on. Not famous, not advertised, just known. If your car broke down in winter, there was light on the hill. If grief kept you awake at night, there was coffee on the stove. If you needed silence, there was a chair by the window where the sun lingered longest. Years passed the way good years do, without urgency. The roof was replaced plank by plank. Windows were repaired, then repainted. The boiler was upgraded carefully, respectfully, like an elder being offered help without being dismissed. Laughter became a permanent resident. Arguments happened too, but they ended at the table, not the door. Ethan grew older without noticing it. His hair grayed at the temples. The lines on his face softened rather than deepened. He moved differently now, slower, steadier. He knew where he belonged, and that knowledge changed the way his feet met the floor each morning. One evening, near the edge of autumn, Ethan stood on the porch watching the light fade through the trees. The air carried a familiar coolness, but not the kind that threatened. It felt like a memory, not a warning. Behind him, the door opened. Noah stepped out, taller now, shoulders broad, his voice deeper but still unmistakably the same. A couple stood in the doorway behind him, hesitant, holding hands too tightly. "Come in," Noah said to them, gentle and certain. "It's warm." Ethan watched as they crossed the threshold, watched the house accept them the way it always had, without question. The windows glowed as dusk settled, not with the harshness of firelight alone, but with movement. Shadows passing, heads leaning together, life in quiet motion. Ethan felt the weight of the years then, not heavy, but full. He thought of the night they'd arrived. The dead car, the snow that erased roads, the fear that had once felt endless. He thought of all the times he had almost left, almost chosen the easier silence of giving up. Warmth, he understood now, was not something you stumbled upon. It was something you defended. He stepped down from the porch and walked a few paces into the yard, turning back to look at the house. Every window held a small story. Every doorframe carried fingerprints of people who had needed shelter and found it. "We stayed," he whispered. The house answered in light. "If this story moved you, reminded you of a place, a person, or a moment when warmth changed everything. Don't let it end here. Like this story to keep it alive. Comment with the moment that stayed with you the longest. Subscribe to the Hidden Treasure Stories, where forgotten places, broken lives, and quiet hope find their way home. Because sometimes the greatest treasure is simply staying when everything else tells you to leave.